Thank you very much for coming. My purpose in coming to Berlin is to put before you a lasting solution to the seemingly intractable problems connected with the euro. That sounds like mission impossible. After all, the problems have been with us for a number of years, and they have grown worse rather than getting better. We've been drifting from crisis to crisis, and both the economic and the political situation keeps deteriorating. It's been a thoroughly debilitating process, accompanied by a lot of suffering, not here in Germany, but in the so-called periphery countries, and generating a lot of hostility, anger, and resentment, both here at the core and in the periphery. We reached a point where the survival of the euro could no longer be taken for granted, and there is a real danger that the euro will destroy the European Union itself, exactly because of its division into a core and a periphery. The euro crisis has turned into a veritable nightmare. But nightmares can be escaped. You can wake up and realize that all the seemingly insoluble quandaries are creatures of your own imagination. And that's the message I should like to deliver. Let me say a few words about myself. You may know me as a successful speculator, a hedge fund manager, now retired, who knows a thing or two about financial markets. But I'm also a fervent believer in the European Union as an embodiment of an open society. And I don't want the euro to destroy it. I have a network of foundations active in various parts of the world, and I can testify from personal experience that the world really needs a strong and prosperous Europe devoted to the principles of open society. The traumatic experience of my life was the German occupation of Hungary in 1944. I survived it because my father taught me at an early age that it's better to confront harsh reality than to passively submit to it. I realize that in my analysis, I am quite critical of German policies, but please don't take it amiss. I'm equally critical of others, including the financial markets. As an erstwhile disciple of Karl Popper, I have developed a philosophy based on the recognition that our understanding of the world in which we live is inherently imperfect, and our misconceptions play an important role in shaping the course of history. It just happens that as the largest and most successful creditor country, Germany is in the driver's seat, and whether you like it or not, your policies largely determine the outcome of the current crisis. The policy of fiscal retrenchment in the midst of rising unemployment is pro-cyclical and pushing Europe into a deeper and longer depression. That's no longer a forecast, it's an observation. The German public doesn't yet feel it and doesn't quite believe it, but it's all too real in the periphery, and it will reach Germany in the next 6 months or so. My message is that the looming depression is largely self-inflicted, and the nightmare can be escaped. It won't be easy. The euro crisis is extremely complex, and complex problems don't have easy solutions. I won't repeat my analysis because you can read it on Spiegel Online. I'll just highlight the key points, and then I'll bring my argument up to date in light of the impending decision of the Constitutional Court. The European Union was meant to be the embodiment of an open society, a voluntary association of equal states that surrendered part of their sovereignty for the common good. The euro crisis is turning the European Union into something fundamentally different. The member countries are divided into two classes, creditors and debtors, with the creditors in charge. As the strongest creditor country, Germany is emerging as the hegemon. Debtor countries have to pay substantial risk premiums for financing their government debt, and this is reflected in their cost of money throughout the economy. To make matters worse, they are pushed into counter-cyclical policies by Germany. This is not the result of some evil plot, but a lack of coherent policy making. The Bundesbank remains committed to an outmoded monetary doctrine that is deeply rooted in Germany's traumatic experience with inflation. So the Bundesbank recognizes only inflation as a threat to stability and ignores deflation, which is the real threat today. Therefore, Germany insists on imposing austerity on debtor countries. And this can easily become counterproductive because a reduction in GDP automatically increases the debt ratio. And that can outweigh the benefits of structural reforms. This point has not been understood in Germany until now. Structural reforms worked for Germany a few years ago. Why should it work for Europe now? The answer is that it was counter-cyclical when the rest of Europe enjoyed a real estate and consumption boom, so that Germany could enjoy an export-led recovery. But it's pro-cyclical now, so that Europe is pushed into a depression. The division of Europe into creditor and debtor countries had brought some unintended and unexpected benefits for the creditors. They enjoy a competitive advantage, and they fare better than the debtors. This creates a real danger that the two-tier Europe will become permanent. Both human and financial resources are attracted to the center, and the periphery will become permanently depressed. Germany will even enjoy some relief from its demographic problems by the immigration of well-educated people from the Iberian Peninsula and Italy instead of less qualified Gastarbeiter from Turkey or Ukraine. Although this was unintended, some German politicians have started to figure out the advantages it has conferred on Germany, and this has begun to influence their policy decisions. As time passes, there will be increasing grounds for blaming Germany for the policies it is imposing on Europe, while the German public will feel unjustly blamed. This is truly a tragedy of historic significance. As in ancient Greece, in ancient Greek tragedies, misconceptions and the sheer lack of understanding have unintended and fateful consequences. In the long run, a Eurozone permanently divided is politically unacceptable. The debtors are bound to revolt sooner or later. If and when the euro breaks up in disarray, it will also destroy the common market and the European Union. Europe will be worse off than it was when the effort to unite it began, because of a legacy of mutual mistrust and hostility. The later it happens, the worse the ultimate result. That's such a dismal prospect that it must be prevented if at all possible. It's time to consider alternatives that would have been inconceivable until recently, because the euro must not be allowed to destroy the European Union. That puts Germany before a difficult choice. Either lead the Eurozone out of the looming depression towards a political union with genuine burden sharing, or leave the euro to the debtor countries. They would find it surprisingly easy to grow their way out of their over-indebtedness if Germany didn't stand in the way. Since all accumulated debt is denominated in euro, it makes all the difference who remains in charge of the euro. If Germany left, the euro would depreciate, the debtor countries would regain their competitiveness, their debt would diminish in real terms, and with the central bank in their control, the threat of default would simply evaporate. The creditor countries, by contrast, would encounter stiff competition in their home markets from the euro area and incur losses on their claims and investments denominated in euro. The extent of their losses would depend on the extent of the depreciation. Therefore, creditor countries would have an interest in keeping the depreciation within bounds. After the initial dislocation and shock, the eventual outcome would fulfill John Maynard Keynes' dream of an international currency system in which both creditors and debtors share responsibility for maintaining stability, and Europe would escape from the looming depression. The same result could be achieved with far less cost to Germany if Germany chose to behave as a benevolent hegemon. I'm happy to note that the political debate in Germany has shifted in favor of saving the euro. Both the decision of the June summit to create a banking union and the bond buying program announced by the ECB on September 6th were major steps in the right direction. And both were made possible by the support of Chancellor Angela Merkel. Only two other steps would now be needed to achieve a lasting solution to the euro crisis, and I want to be quite specific about them. First, activate the debt reduction fund recommended by the Chancellor's Council of Economic Advisors and endorsed by the Social Democrats and the Greens. That would help create a level playing field. Second, stop imposing pro-cyclical austerity measures for the duration of the recession. That would save Europe from depression. And we are now tantalizingly close to a lasting solution if only we could get these two steps accepted. It's up to Germany now to decide which alternative it chooses. If the German public were willing to accept the additional liabilities that the remaining two steps would entail, it would be by far the best for all concerned if Germany stayed in the euro. If not, it would be best if Germany and the other like-minded creditor countries withdrew from the euro in a negotiated treaty, because that would be necessary for an orderly separation. The impending decision of the Constitutional Court may well prohibit Germany from taking on the additional obligations and delegations of power that the remaining two steps would involve. In that case, Germany would have to hold a referendum to decide whether to lead or leave. Either decision would be better than to allow the euro to destroy the European Union. But to believe that the recent steps are sufficient and we are on the right track is like lulling yourself to sleep and ensure the continuation of the nightmare. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soros, for your speech, which is thought-provoking, especially here in Berlin. We heard a dramatic and also a passionate statement from a person who is profoundly worried about the future of one of the most exciting, most some of the greatest idea of post-war Europe, the unification of Europe. I'm very happy that we can conduct this debate today. Those are truly dramatic days. We had last Thursday the announcement of Mr. Draghi, how to save the euro, finally. And 2 days from now, the German Constitutional Court will announce the result of nights and days of internal debates. They, as we heard here, have a really, truly difficult decision to make, and is probably one of the most crucial decisions of the German Constitutional Court to accept the European Stability Mechanism or to deny the rights to install it or to do it, but under restrictions. In the next hour or so, we will debate. I start to ask you a couple of questions, and then we hope to include the audience. I see a couple of truly professional debaters here in the audience, so I hope for a good debate and a participation. Mr. Soros, in short, you tell the Germans to leave or to lead. Now, it is pretty difficult for me as a Spiegel journalist to, in a certain way, sometimes take the position of a government, of our government, but I fear I sometimes have to do it, and if it's only to play the devil's advocate.
By all means.
So, many Germans, let's start, many Germans are deeply troubled. They're worried, and they feel almost punished for unjustified reasons. I remember the late 90s when I was a correspondent in America, and when everybody made fun about the Germans who are so traditional, who can't come up with reforms, who don't know how to start new enterprises, who don't know how to create employment, and so on. But then, in the last 10 years, we saw a lot of painful reforms. And now, the people feel forced to save countries who took the gains of the last 10 years, but didn't take the pain. So can you understand the German anger?
No, I really do understand it, and I sympathize with it up to this point, because Germany has in fact done very well and has not sought a position of hegemony in Europe. In fact, I would say explicitly wanted to avoid it. And that is one of the reasons why it doesn't quite live up to that position, which is actually a very comfortable and desirable position to have. And I would compare Germany's position today to the United States position after the end of the Second World War, where it was the victor, and in the Bretton Woods system, it became the first among equals, with the certain advantages of having its currency as the international currency. But then the United States lived up to that responsibility with the Marshall Plan, and thereby deserved lasting loyalty and friendship of all of Europe, particularly Germany.
But we hear that often. Often the Anglo-Saxon world is reminding us what we had, what we gained through the Marshall Plan and so on after the war. But the Marshall Plan put much less burden on the Americans than the potential negative outcome of, or let's say a failure of some southern states would put on the German economy and the German taxpayer. So the percentage of the GDP of the Marshall Plan was very small.
Yeah, well, it was 1.5%. And this is one of the misunderstandings, because so far Germany hasn't spent anything like 1.5% of its GDP. Actually, has probably benefited from the divergence in exchange in interest rates, which is bigger than the cost of all the efforts so far, because it's a very significant amount, you know, because having negative interest rates would not be the case if you didn't have the crisis. But the costs so far, basically Germany has extended loans. In fact, at the beginning, in the Greek case, at penalty rates. So it was a rescue with a penalty, which is a very strange way to go about rescuing the country. And in fact, Germany, I mean, I compare the euro crisis to the financial crisis, the international banking crisis in 1982. Then the IMF saved the banking system by imposing hardship on the debtor countries, but preserved the banks. And I think it was a similar kind of a rescue in the case of Greece, because the banking system needed to be protected. So, and if Greece would have been turned around, there would be no additional cost. If Greece actually goes down the drain, as it is in the process of doing, then of course there will be a cost. But if Germany now allowed the debt reduction fund to go ahead, and it was successful, it would be no cost to Germany at all. And even if it failed, it would be a cost to the ECB, where Germany would have to bear its proportionate cost.
Yeah, perhaps this is one of the reasons why there is so much, why the Germans feel so uncomfortable. They think that they have contributed already a lot. They sacrificed the mark. They paid always a little more than the other countries to save the unification process of Europe. And now they are forced to make guarantees, which they don't have to pay at the moment, but they are forced to make it. So many people in this country feel overburdened. They fear that there are huge amounts of potential, or that there is a huge risk building up to them.
I recognize that, and if this is really what the German public, the majority, feels, then in fact they should leave the euro. And I think the rest of Europe should thank them for doing that, because without Germany standing in the way, there would be it would be remarkably easy for the debtor countries to convert that debt into Eurobonds, and they would be able to borrow their Europe, excluding the Eurozone, excluding Germany, actually compares favorably, not only with the United Kingdom, but with United States and Japan, and therefore would be able to borrow in the international markets at comparable interest rates.
It's a charming argument, but that I fear it won't be that easy, because just to leave the euro, I mean, we just don't want to just go right now, yeah? I mean, we don't want to isolate ourselves either. So it's more like a position that we feel that wasn't there an agreement? Wasn't there the agreement that the euro was introduced under this as a succession of the mark, guaranteed by the same principles what the Bundesbank held up over the decades and made the mark so stable and so on. So there was basically one mantra, which was the post-war mantra for the Germans, that is stability, stability, stability. And now in Brussels everything is risked, and that is worrisome.
But you see, the Bundesbank interprets stability only on one side, namely fighting inflation. And the danger to stability is deflation. And if only this point were understood, and this is not an impossible point to understand, because there are textbooks written about it. So it's not a new problem. This was the problem that caused the depression. It was a different setting, but the problem was the same. It was the debate between Keynes and Hayek, for instance. It was in fact resolved, and basically all the central banks in the world, with the exception of the Bundesbank, has acknowledged this and is now engaged in quite unconventional quantitative easing, which may or may not work, but at least so far it has worked that it has avoided the depression that the whole world would have sunk into if they had followed the Bundesbank's approach.
Yeah, I would like to ask you a question, and perhaps you can take away or put away in your mind your role as which you took this evening as a promoter of European unification and so on. Just take your old role as speculator. Would you speculate on deflation or would you speculate on inflation now?
Right now, I would definitely not speculate, but be prepared. Be prepared for deflation. Actually, it creates very difficult conditions for investing, and I would now be happy to see. I'm not running my fund anymore. It's done by professionals, but it's there to support my foundations, and I frankly am adjusting my policy in the foundation to perhaps 5% return a year would be very satisfactory because of the deflationary pressures that are particularly strong in Europe, but they are worldwide because you have had, 25 years of this super boom, and now you have a process of deleveraging that's worldwide.
Interesting. I would like to come back to Mario Draghi and the skeptical Germans. So, what angers many people here the most, I think, is that Draghi is now the most powerful politician in Europe, aside Angela Merkel. But we can. But
that's only because Angela Merkel backed Draghi against Weidmann.
Okay. But let me finish my thought. What we feel is we can vote against Merkel. If we don't like her policies, we can vote against her. But we can't vote against Draghi. He acts absolutely on his own. I mean, of course, he has the whole ECB and he has all his directors and so on. But there is no democratic control. And that is, at the moment, a very crucial debate in Germany. Can you understand? How can we change that?
No, I fully agree with you. And the temporary solution, the stopgap solution that we have arrived at is in fact deficient. And I think Weidmann has a valid point in saying that too much has fallen to the ECB, the central bank, because you lack a fiscal authority, a political authority. And I argue that you actually would need to form such a fiscal authority because the fiscal authority acting in cooperation with the central bank would constitute a complete currency. That's the missing element. Now, it's evolving because the ESM, the fund, is in a way the beginning of a fiscal authority, but it doesn't really act like that because every decision has to be approved by every parliament, or every parliament that insists on it, as the Germans do. And therefore it's very unwieldy and cannot really respond to the pressures put on it by the markets. It's inadequate. Yeah. And the euro was on the verge of collapsing a couple of weeks ago when the risk premium on Spanish bonds went over 7%. And that's when Angela Merkel, who was determined to save the euro, basically backed Mario Draghi. And then Draghi then made the most of this opportunity. And that's how you have the bond buying program, which has worked and is going to work as a stopgap. But at the same time, it's actually a step towards making the two-tier Europe a legal, bringing it into legal existence by insisting that to activate the bond buying program, you have to make an agreement with the EFSF and its successor, which is controlled by Germany, because the ESM will have 85% majority requirement, and Germany has 27% of the votes.
But what we see at the moment is a debate within the ECB during the last days. How close the connection between the actions of the ECB, how close the connection between the actions of the ECB and the ESM has to be. I mean, is a country who is asking for bond buying by the ECB, does that country has to have asked the ESM for help before or not? That is unclear at the moment, as we hear from the ECB. I mean, so it seems that Draghi is taking all the power.
No, I think this is clear from the declaration of the presentation by Draghi on September 6th, that it's conditional on the EFS program. That, I think, is one of the clear decisions that were announced. And I can also see that in some ways it's a justified decision, because otherwise everybody is very worried about the moral hazard. And you know, Monti might agree or behave correctly, but if you will have elections next year, and if Berlusconi comes back in Italy, what happens? So you do need, that's why you need a fiscal authority, the debt reduction fund, and an effective way of punishing a country that disobeys, which is very simple if you have the debt redemption fund. Because if you misbehave, the redemption fund just charges more than its cost of money, puts in a penalty. And once you do that, the government is liable to fall.
Yeah. But that's exactly the nightmare of many people here, the nightmare. A Berlusconi-led Italy, which gets kind of unconditional or little controlled funding by the ECB to basically continue a more or less populistic politic financed by German taxpayers. So is that a nightmare? Can we wake up from that?
No, I think you could, by gradually moving towards a fiscal union and political union. You can't go there in one jump, because the tendency is for increased mistrust. You have to rebuild trust. And if you can't rebuild it, then you have to accept that it's better to cut the euro in half, have a euro of debtors, and have a Deutschmark for the creditor countries. That would work, and it would save the European Union. It would be a big shock politically, because you know, I think that people who want the Europe to stay together, they also want the euro to stay together. So, but if it's a choice between the two, it's better to sacrifice the euro than Europe.
You are, in your essay, you are arguing with the German term Schuld. So Schuld means, has a double meaning, guilt and debt. And the Germans have basically, as you argue, a Schuld to save Europe, to be the benevolent hegemon, or to leave, as you say, which would be a solution which we all don't like to happen. But why are the Germans guilty for Greek corruption, for the easy lending of Spanish banks in a real estate bubble, or for Italian inability to make their economy more competitive?
Yeah.
Where is the Schuld? I don't understand that.
Look, there's no question that Greece abused the system. Although I would like to point out that the people who abused the system and made large amounts of money have their money in Swiss or German bank accounts, and they are not suffering. The people in Greece were not actually the ones who did those things. But I'd like to leave Greece apart, because there clearly there's a serious Schuld on the part of the Schuldners. But you take Spain. Spain was a poster child of responsible behavior. It had a lower, significantly lower debt ratio than Germany. Germany broke the rules. Spain lived by the rules and was actually held up as a paragon of virtue, because it was more counter-cyclical in its regulation of banks than other countries. And nevertheless, it got caught up, because that's another defect of the euro, that it was only designed to deal with excesses or misbehavior by the public authorities. That didn't realize that the private sector is actually prone to instability. And that was one of the mistakes that were made in designing the euro, which was not at the time specific to Europe, because the United States and the Anglo-Saxon world was the originator of this misconception. But the crash of 2008 has demonstrated that theory, of what I call market fundamentalism, that the markets are always tend towards equilibrium and ensure the best allocation of resources, is actually false.
I think we saw many theories fail and many economists failed, and some journalists as well during the last 10 years. At this time, I would like to open the debate to the public, and I think we have a microphone which we can handle around. So who would like to start? Perhaps you introduce you first with your name.
Okay, I'm one of the journalists who failed. My name is Peter Bild. Actually, I'm one of the journalists who didn't fail, because I did not fall for the Spiegel line on this. I think what you do, Mr. Soros, is to identify most clearly that the German fear of inflation is misplaced, and that the German fear of deflation is, if you like, is simply not there, or should be far more pronounced than it is. After all, it was deflation in the 1930s that brought brought Hitler to power and the world to war, not the horrible inflation of the 1920s, though no doubt the two were linked. And my question really is if you can't even persuade the person that you're now speaking with that deflation is at least as big a problem, how on earth are you going to inform the German public, or who is going to take the lead in persuading the German public that Spiegel really has got it wrong on this?
I told you that I played a little bit devil's advocate here, yeah?
I wasn't blaming you for being part of the government, I was blaming you for being part of Spiegel.
Thank you.
No, one of the promising aspects of the situation is that in Germany there is still a debate, an open and ongoing debate. I hope we are part of that process. And I think that I personally find the debate that I'm engaging in here more informed than the debates that I've been engaging in America in the past. So, and that is where I pin my hope. In other words, I think that if you put a cogent case to the German public, they will hear it, and if it really does hang up and hang together, and after turning it around and looking at it from every angle, actually come around to accepting it. Maybe I'm idealistic, but that's the only hope I see to stop this nightmare.
My name is Lothar Hart. I'm just watching the discussion in the way as if the Germans were doing nothing. The debate is running as if we are not spending any money, as if we were sitting there tied like a duck's ass and not doing anything. But the contrary is right. You know, we did everything possible so far. And I don't think it has been appreciated enough. So we are not the stubborn guys doing nothing. We are the guys paying all over the place. Thank you.
I never said that Germany did nothing. What I said, and I believe is correct, Germany has always done the minimum that is necessary to hold the euro together. And the minimum is not enough, and actually is more risky than doing the maximum. If you did the maximum, you would have a bigger potential liability, but actually experience no loss whatsoever, because the euro would escape from this trap, would have nominal growth of a few percent, and the debt would shrink, because there is no way that you can get out of the debt burden by shrinking the economy. You have to have growth. You can grow out of this situation. So if you change your approach, and this is really it's not the fact that Germany is dictating policy that is causing the problem. If the policy would be a productive policy that actually got you out of the problem, then it would be fine. It wouldn't be ideal, and hopefully you would improve it by increasing the political, as you develop a political union, you reduce the inequality between the parties. But the trouble is that the policy is counterproductive.
We hear that argument pretty often, that if we only would have been more active in the early month or early year of the crisis, then we could have saved Europe from the mess we are in now. Is that really true? I mean, didn't some country needed truly a wake-up call? You seem to put a lot of trust in the reason of politicians. Perhaps we and many people in the German public don't do that. And we think we needed a certain amount of force and pain to change ill-directed policy in some countries.
Yeah. No, look, I want to make it quite clear that the insistence on structural reforms is a correct insistence. Conditions have changed, and you need to reorient your social security system, your labor market, etc. So structural reforms are in fact necessary, but they are not sufficient. And structural reforms in individual countries are certainly not sufficient, because there is a structural, really deep, fundamental defect in the construct of the euro. And that needs to be addressed in addition to the structural reforms in individual countries. That is my argument.
Some more questions. Over there.
The micro is here. One short question. My name is Daniel Tümpel. I have a question with regard to the estimate of the duration of the crisis. How long would you reckon it would take in a positive scenario if all the structural reforms would get into place? And how long would you estimate would it take if none of these structural reforms would come to place? Thank you.
The question was about the duration of the crisis. If all the structural reforms come into place, it take how long? I mean, when can we hope? And specifically, the young people of the southern countries, when can they start to be hopeful again? Because it's absolutely horrible for them at the moment.
Look, the international banking crisis of 1982 cost Latin America a lost decade. The collapse of the real estate boom in Japan, which occurred, I think, some 25 years ago, and Japan has had no growth for the last 25 years. So we are talking about something quite fundamental, and it will take time to get out of it. But pursuing pro-cyclical policies makes the hole bigger. You dig your own grave in a way. And therefore, that's what extends the crisis. Counter-cyclical policies are needed. Now, there are difficulties in introducing counter-cyclical policies when there's already, the countries are over-indebted. This is the big difference from the 1930s, when Keynes argued that it doesn't matter what you spend the money on, as long as you create demand, because there was no government debt to speak of. So this is a difficult situation, and all I am arguing for is to eliminate the pro-cyclical. So don't dig at the hole deeper. And I've been following this crisis since its inception. I have written articles at each stage pointing out what could have turned it around. But instead of that, the problem just kept on growing. And I would never have, for instance, raise the issue of Germany leaving the euro until this year, because it was not necessary to stop the crisis. So you could have stopped it with less effort, but the measures would have had to be convincing. And that is why what Draghi has done at the central bank is more convincing than the previous steps, because he insisted on unlimited intervention, because that's what you need to convince the markets. So it's a very peculiar kind of situation that you actually have to come with overwhelming force. And if you do, which very often has been done, the intervention actually results in a profit, because you buy some distressed assets and sell it at a higher price later. So that's what is needed. And now the problem is really big, because the very existence of the euro has been brought into question. And I think by taking the stance, that doubt has been to a large extent relieved. So it was, the recent steps are much better. And the other big step is the creation of the banking union. So right now, we are tantalizingly close to an actual turning point. But you do need the other two steps. You do need to create a level playing field by the debt reduction plan, and you must abstain from pushing more pro-cyclical austerity programs onto the countries. Those are the two conditions.
There were more questions. Over there now. Okay.
My name is Reinhard Blomert from the Wissenschaftszentrum. My question is, why don't states like Greece, Spain, Portugal sell the state bonds to the public? Public would be happy to have 2 or 3% interest rates. They sell it to Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank, who want 6 or 7%. Belgium does this. Why don't the other central banks do that?
Could you repeat the question again?
Ich sag's mal auf Deutsch.
No. In English, it was.
Central bank states sell their state bonds with an auction. And the partners of the auction are Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and all these banks. These want risk Aufschläge, 7 or 8%. If the states would sell their state bonds to the public, to the open public would be happy to have them, because the interest rate is so minimal that they would be happy to take them for 2 or 3%.
So why the states sell to institutional investors and not to the general public, which would be happy with lower interest?
I don't think they are able to. They would be happy to do it. They would be happy to sell to, China at 3% if China was willing to buy it. So unfortunately, that is not open. You have to remember that markets are not always all-knowing and all-understanding. They have their own bias. And right now, there's fear and uncertainty and lack of trust. And that's what's reflected by the market. There is a market failure as well as a failure of the regulators and the authorities. And that market failure is actually as a result of the authorities mishandling the situation.
Next question. My name is Christoph Gottschalk. Let us imagine for a second this country would decide to lead and not to leave. In that case, we would need a very strong leader, someone who stands firmly on normative grounds, who has a clear set of values, and of course who's an excellent communicator who can give a sort of narrative to the people in this country. Do you think we have this leader? And secondly, I mean, what do you think? Let's imagine the situation where we lead, in your wording. What will the French say? I mean, this is going to be Hollande's nightmare, isn't it?
So the issue is, you say leave or lead.
Yeah.
So if we lead, we need a leader, a passionate leader who can also engage the public, who can communicate, who is strong and can communicate. Right. So that's the one thing. But the other thing is what France say if we have such a leader. So two questions basically. Do we have a leader like that? Is Angela Merkel the leader we need at the moment? And what would France say if the Germans really start to lead?
Well, I think that actually Angela Merkel is a great democratic leader in the sense that she pays attention to the public attitudes, tries to guess the public attitudes, and tries to do what she thinks the public wants.
Is she paying too much?
But right now, you would actually need a leader who would influence and convince the public opinion. And there, I'm afraid, she is falling short because she doesn't herself have the vision or even the understanding of finance and the economics to have a clear vision of the way out. I think if she had that, she would successfully convey it because she is a great tactician in influencing public opinion. So she provides this kind of democratic leadership, which means following public opinion instead of leading it. Now, as far as France is concerned, actually a division into a Latin Euro and a Northern Bloc would fulfill the political aspirations of the French political class that aspires to be a player on the global scene. And I recall very clearly in '89 talking to the French of these people. They decided that their only chance was to tie their wagon to Germany. But actually, since they have not introduced the necessary structural and fiscal reforms, and in some ways have also have lost competitiveness, they would be ideally situated to be the leaders of the Latin bloc, and then they would be the equal of Germany. And they would have a common interest in keeping the euro together, keeping the northern and the southern euro not too far apart, in order to the northerners, in order to not to suffer losses, and the southerners in order to avoid the excesses that would develop otherwise, so have some discipline. So it would work if you could get there. And the reason that it hasn't happened because it's difficult to get there. Because Germany, I don't think, will voluntarily choose to leave the euro, and there is nobody here really to push. And it really would require Germany to realize that in the long run, keeping the euro together by doing the minimum instead of doing the maximum will destroy the European Union, not only the euro. So you have to be aware of this historic tragedy that is facing Europe. So there you really need real leadership to get Germany to do the right thing.
The historic tragedy is perhaps also that the Germans think they do already the maximum. The historic tragedy here in the country is that the Germans feel they do already the maximum, but indeed, in your words, they're doing the minimum. And there's a huge misconception. And this bridge to build, I think, is very, very difficult at the moment. Next question.
Hi, I'm Dave Huang. Could you speak to, could you talk a little bit about the role of economic competitiveness and how important it is long-term especially for the Southern European nations, and I guess if you could just speak on that.
When you say economic intelligence, you mean the intelligence of economists?
No, excuse me. He said, let's talk about economic competitiveness. Competitiveness, how important is it for the southern states to become more competitive than they are now to finish this crisis?
No, it is very important. And clearly, exchange rate adjustment with Germany leaving would immediately re-establish competitiveness. In fact, the market could easily overshoot because markets don't always get it right. But eventually, you would settle down to the appropriate exchange rate, and competitiveness would be resolved. Holding the euro together and doing those two additional steps would not solve the problem of competitiveness by itself. And that it would be a much more longer-term, gradual accomplishment. So from a purely economic point of view, the leave is the best solution. But politically, it would be a tremendous shock and a tremendous risk. And therefore, if it were possible, thinking mainly about the political consequences, it would be better to hold the euro together.
Do you see public figures in Spain? Do you see public figures? Do you see politicians in Spain, in Italy, who are willing and who have the power to make their countries more competitive? Because it's painful, and what we see at the moment is more a rise of the populistic forces, which are certainly not working in that direction.
No, the danger is that populism and anti-European sentiment will come and take possession in the periphery. That's the danger. And then the euro falls apart step by step, and it's a very destructive process. But it so happens that the Rajoy government in Spain is almost slavishly bought into the German position, in my opinion, too far for their own good. And Monti is certainly very committed to structural reforms and was making good progress. and turned to Chancellor Merkel and said, I need some reinforcement. I need some to show some result. And he meant primarily a reduction in the cost of borrowing, which, as long as it was happening, was reinforcing him. But his request actually annoyed the Chancellor. And Monti is now a lame duck.
He only has a couple of months left.
Pardon?
He only has a couple of months left.
He's got a few months left, but mainly he lost the power to get the parliament to do his bidding. If Germany had been willing to do more than the minimum and had actually reinforced a reduction in the risk premium, which today the ECB has accomplished by just simply having this plan of bond buying in the drawer, then Monti could have continued, and he would have left behind a much reformed country, Italy. So an opportunity was lost.
Next question.
Okay.
Marta Ors, my name. I would like to ask you, what do you think what the other countries would say if Germany really would take this leading role? I mean, I read it every day. I think you all read every day in the press that many countries think that Germany is already having a leading role in the Euro crisis and the European Union. And I think this might also cause many conflicts. What do you think about that?
You mean the countries other than in Europe?
No, I mean European
in Europe.
countries.
In Europe, the question is if Germany is taking a stronger role, what the other countries would say. Similar, how the other countries would react.
To Germany leading or leaving?
To Germany leading. To Germany leading.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that if Germany really agreed to some burden sharing and risked its own credit, it would be greatly appreciated. And I think Germany could actually emerge as the leader of Europe in the same way as the United States became the leader of the free world. Now, this is, with the passage of time, this is becoming increasingly difficult. Given the prevailing mood here, you read your own newspapers, so you know what the mood is. And that creates mistrust. So to rebuild the trust gets more and more difficult. But certainly, had Germany taken a different view, it would have emerged as would have earned the gratitude of the rest of Europe.
So is it too late?
Pardon?
Is it too late?
It's 5 minutes after midnight, let's say.
Okay, next question.
Hello, Mr. Soros. My name is Gia. I am representing the Young Scholars Initiative, which started with the INET Council in Berlin in April here. And I would like you to comment what you started to comment before about economic intelligence. And that was the question that you thought was the other person's question. Economic intelligence in academia, in politicians and policymakers, in media. Young Scholars Initiative is conducting a series of interviews with different figures, and we had a perspective of why German thinkers or German economics have a very orthodox view on how to conduct economic policies.
Why Germany?
The question is,
Yeah, so I just a comment.
why is the German thinking so orthodox?
Yes,
Yeah.
by comparing, and also a comment on in general
I think
German
it has to do with the traumatic experience of inflation, mainly in the 20s, but also before the stabilization after the Second World War. So, and that was runaway inflation in Germany in the 20s, which wiped out the wealth of the middle class and prepared Germany for the rise of Nazi National Socialism. And that is the traumatic experience of Germany that has created this, whereas the unemployment and depression was the traumatic experience in the United States.
I think there's one, I mean, we hear that always as traumatic experience, but I think there's one thing which is also very important for the German attitude, and that is a mistrust in debt. Nobody here has 10 credit cards like you have as a student in the US, and you have them all maxed out already. The saving rate in Germany is still among the highest in the world. So now being forced to give even more credit to countries who seem to be on the wrong track.
I think you're right, and actually Germany is the only country that didn't have a housing boom until maybe this year when...
We had a housing boom about 3 years after unification. And we had exactly the same solutions. Many of the publishing houses, for example, thought to transfer their major editors to...
One second. Let's speak into the microphone.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
We had our bubble encouraged by the government in the early 90s, here in Berlin, Leipzig, and some other places.
So the argument is that we had a housing boom, we had a housing boom in Germany, a real estate bubble, specifically in Berlin, but also in East Germany after reunification. But it was only for 3 years, and then it was over. And it was not as long-lasting as we have seen it like in the neighboring countries, like in London or in Denmark or wherever you look.
I think the Berlin boom went bust before it started, practically.
You talk about...
But real estate prices in Berlin rose by 17% last year, yes. And the rate of increase is faster this year. So actually, and this is another reason why it's so difficult for Germans to understand the danger of deflation, that actually you now have a serious danger of a housing bubble developing in Berlin.
In Berlin, yeah.
Is that already panic buying in your term? Is that already panic buying?
Well, it has a lot to do with the flight of capital and the negative real interest rates. So it is an aberration. It's just the other side of the capital flight.
Where is... Wait, the microphone.
Hello, Mr. Soros. Lisa from Fenton in New York, now living in Berlin. I want to ask you to paint a picture either 5 or 10 years ahead of the lead or leave scenarios, specifically if Germany leaves the euro. You mentioned there'll be political consequences for Germany. Specifically, do you have a picture of what that looks like for Germany politically? What are those political consequences that Germany would pay now or 5 or 10 years later?
I would really have to apologize about my hearing. I
will repeat it. I will repeat it.
Sorry.
So this is basically the second part of your thesis. What will happen if Germany is not leading, but if it's leaving, if it's only leaving. So
Yeah.
how would Germany and
Yeah.
Europe look in 10 years from now if Germany is leaving the Europe?
Politically, specifically.
Look, unfortunately, the line of least resistance leads to neither lead nor leave, but muddle through and do the minimum as you have done until now. That's the line of least resistance. And that will prolong the nightmare and eventually lead to the breakup of the European, destroy the European Union. And I can see it, well, I wouldn't predict it, of course, with any kind of certainty because you can change course at any time. You've come down so far, it's going in that direction, but even if you miss it now, you may regret it and maybe doing something much more dramatic to reverse it. But it will take more and more to reverse it, and the conditions will deteriorate. So that's a nightmare. And I find it so frustrating that you are so tantalizingly close to actually solving the problem. And the authorities have begun to move on some of the issues. For instance, they've recognized that the banking crisis and the sovereign debt crisis are linked together like Siamese twins. And they've also recognized they've got to have a banking union because actually Germany is accumulating tremendous contingent liabilities through the euro clearing system. So it's in Germany's interest to do it also. So that's happening. With the ECB, what has happened is that it does put a lid on the risk premium, and it will not go back to as high as it was before because it's an effective tool against speculation. In other words, it doesn't pay a speculator to push the premium higher because the ECB could activate the program at any time. So, I mean, Spain could ask for it and then it would be activated. As it is, so that helps. It actually buys some time. All these are very positive developments. And if you then had the debt reduction fund and stopped pushing the debtor countries deeper and deeper into the hole, then we could work, it would take time, but Europe could work itself out. So it doesn't take a lot. And yet, even that, for instance, actually the decision of the Constitutional Court may actually prohibit Germany doing those things, in which case you will need a referendum to overcome it. So you are awfully close, and yet so far.
So we have to watch the time, unfortunately. We can take two more questions. One was over there.
Andre Wilken, Stiftung Mercator. As you know, I like your analysis, but in this case, I'm not sure I'm convinced about the solution. Particularly, don't you think that Germany leaving the euro would just be the first step of a breakup of the euro? Because apart from Germany, there are lots of other imbalances within the eurozone, even without Germany, between France and Portugal, Greece, and so on. So and Finland and the Netherlands. So Germany leaving would be the first step of other leaving, and then in the end it would be disorderly or orderly breakup of the Eurozone. So the German exit would be just the first step.
No, a German exit is only possible by treaty, because the current treaty doesn't permit Germany to leave. So you would have to have a treaty and an understanding and a cooperation, and it would be in the interest of the other countries to enter into such a treaty with Germany. So it would be an orderly separation, as distinct from the disorderly separation that would come from first Greece falling out, and then maybe Italy, and you're finished, or Spain. So it's a difference between working out an orderly separation which allows for interest rate adjustments within limits, and working it out without interest rate adjustments. It's more difficult to do it without, but politically it's safer.
So, final question. Mr. Lucky Man over there.
Okay, hello, Mr. Soros. My name is Daniel Wiegand. I'm here from Berlin. I would like to ask you, when the Germans decide to take the lead in Europe and take all the consequences and the risks, what do you think a German leader, the European Union, should do concerning the markets? What would be your advice? What the first political actions should be concerning the regulation of the markets when the Germans take the lead?
Well, I think that
so when the Germans take indeed the lead, what should be the first action? What should they do first? Where should they to lead? Yeah.
No, sorry, not to lead. Well, concerning to regulate the markets.
Concerning to regulate the markets.
Regarding, I think that the banking union means effectively European regulation of the banking system, as opposed to the national regulation. And that is essential to keep the euro together, because already each national regulator is treating its country differently from the rest. In other words, a German regulator today does not allow an Italian bank to transfer money from Germany to Italy. And that leads to national silos, and it destroys the functioning of the banking system. So interbank transactions are at a standstill. So the banking regulation, the banking union, is a very important step, and that is happening. It's in process. So that is a positive thing that's going on. There are other issues with regulation. I think the Finnish central banker is about to report to Commissioner Barnier his recommendations, and he's proposing something between the Vickers Commission from England and the Volcker rules in America, something in between. So this actually is happening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soros. I think we could continue for many more, for much longer time. It was very exciting. We learned it is 5 minutes past 12 and that we have the wrong leader. That's not a good combination. Thank you very much and have a good evening.